Steve, thank you. And, I appreciate the generous introduction. I appreciate all the things you said beforehand, some of which I'm going to try not to repeat verbatim. Let me just say, first of all, I was RNC chairman for 4 years, proud of it, Republican governor, chairman of the Republican Governors Association. But I'm here today to talk to you in a very bipartisan way. In fact, I co-chair the Bipartisan Policy Center's Immigration Reform Task Force. And that includes Condi Rice, who was Secretary of State in the Republican administration, Mike Chertoff, who ran Homeland Security, responsible for border security in the Bush administration, Al Cardenas. Al is the president of the American Conservative Union. Some of you may know. John Shadegg, former congressman from Arizona, a frontline state in this issue. But also Ed Rendell, the former Democrat governor of Pennsylvania. We have Henry Cisneros, the former mayor of San Antonio, Secretary of HUD. Hilda Solis, who was Secretary of Labor in this Obama administration. It's a genuinely bipartisan issue. And let me just say, we ought to look at it through the lens of good policy, not what's good politics. I mean, too much time is spent by the news media saying politically Republicans need to do something about immigration reform because they got hurt so badly on the issue in the campaign last time. Well, I used to work for Ronald Reagan. That's pretty heady stuff for a boy from Yazoo City, Mississippi. But I was head of the political office under Reagan in his second term. And Reagan used to say, never forget, at the end of the day, good policy is good politics. Good policy is good politics. If you'll be for what's good policy, you're going to get good results, Steve, right? And good results is what people want out of their elected officials, what they want out of their government. And for me, good policy is comprehensive immigration reform. Steve mentioned Katrina. My state was, well, we bore the brunt of the worst natural disaster in American history. The Mississippi Gulf Coast was obliterated. We had 64,000 homes that were uninhabitable in a population of 350,000 people. So about half of all the homes down there couldn't be lived in. In history, the most homes ever built in the three counties on the Mississippi Gulf Coast in a year is 1,800. And we had 64,000 to replace. And this was the first time immigration ever entered my mind as a public policy issue, because in Mississippi we had very little immigration. In the 2000 census, just over 1% of the population was Hispanic. Well, the Spanish-speaking labor that came into the coast after the storm was indispensable. I hate to think where Mississippi would have been had they not come, because the guy that you would have called to get to build your house back was building his house back. And that was just the fact of the matter, that we had an incredible need for labor because of displaced population. I'm very proud of the fact that by the end of the school year, the hurricane happened the end of August, the first week of school. By the end of the school year, 94% of the students on the Mississippi Gulf Coast were back in school in their home county. But for the first few weeks and months, there was enormous displacement. And we were saved by Spanish speakers, and I recognize some of them probably not here legally, who slept in the bed of the pickup truck or in a tent, who came to work and to help our people get back on their feet. That's what really piqued my interest in this. And when I watched the national immigration reform debate in the year or two after Katrina was in 2005, and of course the immigration bill was up in the Bush administration the next couple of years, it made me focus on something that Steve Case said a while ago. We are in a global battle for talent. America's in a global battle for capital and labor. as I look at GDP growth, which in this administration has been about 2%. The best year of this administration was 2.4%. And I think about my years in the White House, the economy after the recession of 1980, 81, 82, the economy grew 4.5%, 7.4%, and 4.1% in the first 3 years after the recession. After this recession, we grew 2.4, 1.8, 2.1. And I will suggest to you one of the reasons, they're not the only reason by far, one of the reasons is our labor force is not increasing in size. That actually more people lost their jobs in the recession than have recovered. But one of the reasons is we don't have enough labor for some of the jobs that we have. And if we're going to get GDP back up to 4% or 3.5%, which is the average for the last 40 years, we got to have more labor. And Steve is obviously right. The most obvious talent that we want and need in this country are the people who come here on H-1B visas, high-skilled labor, and it's some wonderful stories. Jesus is a great example of it. You know, I used to say that any kid that got a PhD from engineering at Mississippi State University ought to staple a green card to their diploma. And everybody here, I think, understands that and agrees with that. You know, we'd take that kid today we'd make him go home. He goes home, starts a business in Mumbai that employs 800 people. If we'd have let him, he'd have rather than start a business in Memphis that employed 800 people. And some people are starting to learn that. But that's not the only labor issue in immigration reform. It is obvious, it is important, it is critical that it be done right for our technology industries, but it's more than that. You know, I'll never forget the first month I was governor of Mississippi in 2004. A Mississippi State professor, which is our engineering school, said, you know, Governor, our businesses in Mississippi got three choices. They can innovate, they can immigrate, or they can evaporate. Which is a very interesting way of saying you can either innovate to become more productive so you can stay competitive in the global marketplace, or you're either going to go to where they have cheaper labor, or you're just going to spend your capital down till you throw in the towel. And innovation is the key for productivity increases. We don't get more productive by making people work harder. We do it by making people work smarter or allowing people to work smarter and getting good labor that we can then teach how to deploy and use the technologies of today. That technological advancement requires good labor. And more in the United States, we have people who are not working. I mean, the 13% increase in Social Security disability in this country, just enormous increases by historical standards over just a few years. Unemployment very high, people dropping out of the workforce. I would tell you that we not only need labor for H-1B high skill, but also for essential jobs that are not nearly as high skilled. The most obvious being agriculture. You wouldn't think it. Cotton is not the biggest agricultural commodity in my state. Chickens, poultry is the biggest agricultural commodity. We sell $2.5 billion worth of broilers every year. And if you go to a chicken processing plant in Mississippi, you cannot find anybody who speaks English as their native tongue. Most of them still speak only Spanish, some of them Spanish and English. But they're all immigrants. They came here for work, and they're doing work, frankly, that most people don't want to do. It is a literal fact that we have a program in our correction system where we let inmates who've got a high enough rating for being trustworthy, we let them actually go out and work for designated employers. We have one of our prisons over near a chicken processing area. the inmates get paid, so they usually like to work. Well, they go to the chicken plant and they work about 2 days, and they'd rather be in the penitentiary than work. I mean, literally, they'd rather be in the penitentiary than covered with feathers and blood and guts and Lord knows what else. And we need that labor. I can't tell you how many 100 families in Mississippi, hundreds of families, that raise chickens. But those chickens are not worth anything if there's nobody who can process them. So that's just a tiny microscopic view. They say 70% of the labor, the farm labor in California, is here illegally. 70%, 50%, whatever the percentage. Let's don't forget, California is the #1 agricultural producing state in America. And most of the people there are not there legally. We got to change that. We've got to have an ag visa system that works. We have an ag visa system now. In California, at least, 4% of ag workers are on that kind of visa because it is so cumbersome and unwieldy. So we need labor for a variety of reasons. So to me, the biggest issue about immigration reform from a policy perspective is helping grow our economy. Having the kind of economic growth so that my kids and grandkids can enjoy the same kind of economic opportunities that I did, having grown up in a little small town in the Deep South, where in our country anybody can go anywhere. I do want to mention one other thing that I think is going to be enormously important and probably to a lot of your constituents, and that's border security. I was in the White House in 1986 when we did immigration reform. And I remember well, and Al Simpson and I have had the chance to talk about this on numerous occasions. What was the #1 promise that Congress made to the American people when they did immigration reform, when we passed the bill? We were going to secure the border. That was the first part of the deal. We were going to secure the border, and we literally were going to give amnesty to 4 million people who were here. Literally amnesty. Didn't have to do anything. Well, we gave the amnesty, didn't secure the border. So there is a lot of misgiving in our country, if not distrust, about whether the government's going to actually secure the border. And I think as we go through here, we need to be cognizant of that we need to give your constituents confidence that when this is all said and done, that we're going to have 11 million or some portion of 11 million people who are going to come out of the shadows, who are going to pay their taxes, who are going to live up to rigorous requirements if they want to go to citizenship, and even some pretty good requirements to get a green card, starting a process with some sort of legalization, but that when we get to the end of the day, the average American has got to believe we're not ever going through this again. That we are going to have a secure border and we're going to be able to deal with visas. As many of you probably know, 30 to 40% of the people in the United States illegally came here legally on a visa and just overstayed their visa, and that we have never had a system under a Republican administration or a Democrat administration to prevent that. And people have to believe that border security is in the forefront. And Becky, I will say one of the things that interested me about the Bipartisan Policy Center's task force, Ed Rendell, who was the original co-chairman with me, emphatically said to me on the front end, we Democrats are going to support border security, period. We understand that has to be part of the deal. I think for my constituents, if we believe if we do nothing, if nothing passes, if we do nothing, 10 years from now, there'll be another 10 million illegal immigrants here that come in the next 10 years. That immigration reform is critical to get border security, which is critical to having us never again unintentionally allow millions of people to come here. That is going to be very important for your constituents to recognize and believe. And I will tell you, I think that is very doable. I think that is very doable. I think that is in the hearts and souls of the guys that are trying to pass this, the men and women who are trying to pass this. The Gang of Eight bill, I'm like Steve, and I think it is a great starting place, and I think it's good legislation, period. But I think we all got to realize this is a process that we're going to, as Ollie said, start today on the Senate floor. I don't know how it'll be amended, how it'll not be amended, but then we're going to go to the House and probably have a very different process. The House is likely to come at this from a different way. Instead of one big comprehensive bill, they seem to be planning to have a series of bills, and at the end of that series of bills, the House is allowed under their rules to have what they call engrossment. That is, that you can take a number of bills that are related and roll them up into one bill and conference that with the Senate. So I don't want those of you who are for comprehensive immigration reform to be alarmed when the House starts taking up little bills, because I see that, and I believe the leadership's plan is after they get through, they think they can pass more that way, and then they'll roll it up and they'll conference it with the Senate bill. I don't know exactly how it's going to turn out. I think Steve Case is dead right. This is the best chance we're going to have for another decade to get comprehensive immigration reform. And I think if we don't get comprehensive immigration reform for another 10 years, that we're going to have problems that are twice as big or more than the problems we got now. If you want a solution to illegal immigration, it's immigration reform. If you want to do something to secure the border, this is the process to get it done. If you want to make sure that we have the talent, labor that we need in our country so that we can have the kind of economic growth that we became accustomed to over the last 25 or 50 years, immigration reform is absolutely part of that process. And the last thing is, I can't help but close by saying my great-grandfather came here from Ireland, a little older than you, Jesus, but came here as a teenager, the seventh of 7 brothers, fleeing the potato famine, Irish Protestant, Huguenot, and he came here to work. And to me, that's one of the things that is so essential about the history of America. People came here to work. People didn't come here because this was a place where they were going to be given prosperity, but because they're going to be given an opportunity to make the most out of their lives that they could make. And that is so true of the vast majority of our immigrant population. That's why you hear success stories like Steve was talking about, that 40% of the Fortune 500 were formed by immigrants or the children of immigrants. And that inures to the benefit of every one of us, both for what they create in the way of jobs and economic growth and prosperity. But I will say to you, by what they give us in the way of example. I think about my own children, both of whom have been successful. I'm very proud of them. But I worried about them in high school and college. They never had to sacrifice for anything. You know, middle-class kids grow up with a pretty dang easy life in America. And one of the things that they can see are others who work like Jesus and provide something besides material benefit, but also provide an example of what you can do. And that's what makes us different. That's what is the shining city on the hill is all about. Reagan used to say, and when he would get cranked up on the Blame America First crowd, as Gene Kirkpatrick used to call it, he'd say, yeah, when the Blame America First crowd gets too loud, he said, what you need to do is apply the Gates test. I said, Mr. President, what's the Gates test? He said, well, the Gates test. He said, drop all the gates everywhere in the world and see which way everybody runs. They all run to America. And that's still the case. If you apply the Gates test, people run to America. That's something we ought to be proud of, happy for, and we ought to figure out how we make that work the right way. That's what immigration reform at the end of the day is all about. We don't ever want America to fail the Gates test. We always want it to be the place where everybody wants to come. We just got to have a system that makes it work better than it's worked for the last few years. Thank you for what you're doing. Please know this is not going to be one in Washington. This is going to be one in your district and in your state. I'm tickled you're here. Thank you for meeting with whoever you're going to meet with. But where they really need to see is at town hall meetings in the district. They need to see your members standing up for immigration reform. They need to see your members making plain if we want to secure the border, this is the process we have to go through. At the end of the day, that's where this is going to be won. And I hope that y'all will all, whether you're business or badges or Bibles, whichever of that group or all three, some of you represent, God bless you. That's what we want to make sure you do at home, is that as you take this message home to your district. Thank you all very much.